Hello and welcome back to the West Ham Breakdown podcast, an Analytics United production. He's done it again. 2 weeks in a row. I told you it'd become a thing. We're back. It's the end of the season. The final game has been played. I feel relieved, I think. We won, which is obviously a nice way to end. But also, it's over, which maybe is a bit too negative, but it certainly does feel that way. I think it's completely fair to say that this has been a very underwhelming season. It's not what we hoped for when we parted with Moyes. But hopefully some shoots of positivity to pick out in this final game and sort of where we might be headed, something that we're going to discuss at the back end of this podcast after we've discussed the positives and negatives from the Ipswich game. And then, looking at what we might be building towards as we head into what is expected to be a very busy summer. But as ever, as has been the case for the past few episodes, I'm joined by co-host Darcy Cox. Darcy, how are you? And how did you find the game against Ipswich? Looked really sunny was my main... Maybe that's not good, that was my main takeaway from a 3-1 win, but just looked like a lovely little day out. I've never been to Ipswich, but it looked like fun.
Yeah, it looks like a nice part of the world. I agree. Also, I don't think I've ever been to Ipswich or even maybe have passed through Suffolk, in the car.
I think
or
I've been
something.
to Norwich once, but that's Norfolk, isn't it? So.
Norfolk, yeah. But I guess they're cousins.
Yeah, we need to be careful what we say
yeah.
now.
There's a joke in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, firstly, I agree with what you said at the top of the podcast. It's been a very frustrating season, I think, just because things have rarely gone well. To be honest, things have gone wrong more often than they've not just gone well. So yeah, I'm glad that we're towards the end of it. But like you said, big summer. And if anything, I'd say my feelings are a bit more nervous. I'm a bit worried. I feel like we're actually at quite a pivotal point. It's quite important that this summer goes well because there's no guarantee that teams like Man United and Tottenham have the seasons that they've had, and then if they don't have the seasons they've had, we are right on top of the relegation zone. So yeah, it does need to be a big summer. Lucky Ipswich was a good game to sort of gain some momentum going in. I enjoyed the game. I thought we played well. Like you said, there's always positives and negatives to pull out. But I think it was nice to see us quite comfortably sort of control and dominate a game. It's how you would have wanted to end a negative season. That's the only real way to put it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in possession we looked in control. I think I don't want to fall into the sort of realms of giving too much praise for controlling a game against what is now a championship side. I think that has to be the absolute bare minimum, but also there's been times this season where we haven't seen the bare minimum, so you do have to give some praise. We obviously scored 3 goals as well. Again, don't know if 3 is necessarily reflective of the quality of chances that we created. I still felt like we had a lot of the ball, but a lot of the issues persisted in terms of not necessarily turning possession into consistent attacks that led to actual high quality chances. But I certainly felt like we were good for the win. I don't think we really ever looked to be that troubled. I think there was a few tweaks which we'll come on to that I quite enjoyed, but in particular I think Kudus being dropped was probably a bit of a surprise, something that I would have actually done myself and something that we called for in the preview pod. But yeah, certainly maybe not something that everyone was expecting. But I think the relationship with Bowen and Füllkrug up top was something that I really enjoyed compared to seeing sort of Bowen and Kudus, who seemingly seem to be a lot further apart generally. But I guess it was a slight tweak in shape. It always feels funny saying a tweak in shape in terms of our in-possession plan, which is a good place for us to start as well, because I think obviously we've scored 3 goals. We've executed it relatively well, as we say. But it does feel like there are slight tweaks every week, even though obviously in the press, Potter's persistent about we're maintaining the same shape because we're learning, etc. We want to build on what we've seen. And it is ostensibly a 3 at the back system week in, week out. But this one did feel slightly different. I feel like the midfield functioned a little bit better. I don't know if that's something that you picked out as well, Darcy.
Yeah, it felt like and I don't necessarily know intuitively why it felt so much better, but it seemed, I guess maybe the roles were a little bit more defined. Previously I feel like the midfield composition, even though it's been a three in this 5-3-2, like they can sometimes sort of end up like vertically staggered, and I feel like that was controlled a lot better in this, because it was more like the three you would see in a 4-3-3, just within the 5-3-2. So you had Alvarez sitting a lot deeper, and kind of being the anchor, and then you had James Ward-Prowse as the right eight and Souček as the left eight, and really those guys were tasked with running the channels quite a lot to enable rotations out wide and us to create upside in the final third. And the balance of that felt probably the best it has done in the last 5 or 6 games, particularly without like a Lucas Paquetá, whose obvious role is to go and be creative. And yeah, I agree with you that it was almost refreshing to see that group of players. It's also kind of funny to see us land at the end of the season on the midfield three that we have called throughout the season codependent, or at least they were codependent under Moyes. I think it's kind of funny to see the exact sort of construction of midfield we would have seen with those three work so well in our last game. Maybe it's not such a good thing, because it's just that we've gone around in a big circle this whole season. That might not be unfair to say.
No, I think that probably
I
is.
enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, same. And yeah, I mean, this isn't the place for us to discuss individual performances at length, because we do a whole second half of the podcast called Extra Time, where we will discuss individual performances, and I would expect that some of those midfielders will be discussed heavily and potentially with a view to their futures, or maybe not at the club. I suppose as well I should promote the fact that we will be doing a lot of transfer stuff over the summer too, midfield being maybe the foremost of the departments that we'll look to recruit in. I'd probably look at goalkeeper as well myself, but from all the press briefings it seems like Potter's going to be in the market for at least a couple of midfielders, one would assume. So if you want to hear all that and plenty of other good stuff over the summer, while we're in that pause of relief period, maybe I would call it, after the season that we've had, but certainly as a summer of excitement for West Ham fans, then you can get on that at patreon.com/Analytics United. Really fumbled that one, but we got it out, and yeah, you'll get loads of content throughout the summer from us, as we sort of look to essentially rebuild the squad as though we were in charge. But yeah, the midfield will certainly be an area. I think, as you say, it felt like it functioned a lot better in this game, but perhaps not still a long-term solution. One group, I guess, if we're going to group the players into small little groups of impact, that I felt performed really well in possession was the sort of combination play between Bowen, Ward-Prowse and also Wan-Bissaka on that right-hand side, all of whom I felt had quite fluid roles. I think it's strange to sort of think about a triangle when you're playing with the two up top, but Bowen certainly was drifting out to the right and linking up with Ward-Prowse and Wan-Bissaka. We see it for the goal, right? It's sort of, I think because all of them are quite comfortable in possession and sort of have, at least in the last few weeks, made better decisions in terms of slowing down the ball but then speeding it up at the right time. I think the goal was the perfect example for that, right? That combination play, sort of just taking a brief moment to stop, almost like you're resetting a play in NBA or something. Like the ball carrier, the point guard, usually will sort of go to the edge of the key, stop, wait for people to move around, and then go, right, boom, now we go. And it felt like Bowen was the instigator there, but everyone sort of was working on the same wavelength. So that, to me, felt like a big positive. I think the big difference, and he wasn't perfect throughout the game, but I think it did allow us to do a lot more, was when Bowen was drifting out there, we still retained the ability to sort of whip a ball into the box if we wanted to, because Füllkrug was in there and could challenge the centre-backs. Whereas I think before, when you had the front two of Bowen and Kudus, they would naturally split wider because both of them want to go and try and get into the space to carry towards the goal. But also, if Bowen is out wide and crosses into Kudus, he's got way less likelihood of causing any problems inside the box, particularly if it's in the air. So I felt like that functioned really well. And also in terms of the combinative play, we know that Füllkrug can do that. I think, again, there was a few wayward moments in this game, which we'll come on to, but there was also numerous times where Füllkrug would drop in, pick up the ball, sort of turn around and play a ball out wide into the space for Bowen to run onto, or for Wan-Bissaka to get onto, before then making a movement inside the box usually, which is just sort of what we've been crying out for. It's felt like for a long time, just someone that can be an outlet but also open up spaces for players that allows them to be way, way, way more impactful than we have seen.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's just not funny is the wrong word, but I just think it's it's interesting how simple the solution has been. You play Bowen up top with an actual striker who's gonna I guess pin centre backs and like you said, give an option for if Bowen floats out wide, we can still hit the box. How much that improves Bowen's output. I mean, by far and away the best player on the pitch throughout this game. Yeah. And it's not even just his stuff around the box as well. One of the things that I was really impressed with that trio that you said at the top of this part is how they were able to kind of generate really positive moments in deeper areas as well. So we'd go from like building up down the right, sort of like, just camped inside our half a little bit. And then Bowen, something I've criticised him for, and I know Jack's brought up a couple of times, I'm pretty sure you've mentioned it as well, is his activation of the half space. So we're building up and we need a drop from our winger so that then we have an out ball and then someone basically runs beyond him and he can just play it out there. We never really see that from Bowen. This game we saw it a couple of times, and that was one down to Bowen, I think, being freed up to go and do that, knowing because the other centre-back was pinned by Füllkrug. But two, I was really impressed with the running power of James Ward-Prowse all game. In the final third, he was overlapping, down or underlapping down the channel, and I think that freed up both Wan-Bissaka and Bowen. And then his running from I'm helping the team build up in the sort of a 3-2 shape to, okay, I can see Bowen dropping, I'm going past him so I can collect the ball off of him. Really, really good. Helped us break out quite a few times. And it's that kind of thing. It's those sort of incremental improvements with a little bit more association. That's what we need to see week to week. That's what makes this kind of system work well, when you get those things all working in tandem. And it's good to see that has finally started to come together, because it's almost like it's not a want, it's a need in a back 3, back 5 formation.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I'm glad you picked up the sort of running from the 8s, and I think Alvarez did a relatively good job of this at times as well. I think we've seen it when he has featured throughout the season. I can't remember, there was one game at home where it's probably early on in the Potter era where he was doing similar stuff. Just sort of, I think depth is something that we've lacked a lot throughout this era. I say era as if it's lasted forever. It's only been a few months, but I think it's, as you rightly point out, it's central to this whole system working, really, because if you don't have depth from runners, then it's so easy for the opposition to just sort of defend against you and just pin you in, or sort of make it so difficult to actually knock a few passes between the limited space that exists, because you've not got anyone that's willing to run beyond and sort of force the opposition defenders to make movements that then create the space for the likes of Bowen to operate in, and Füllkrug as well. As I say, I think he did that job quite well. A few other positives that I felt were sort of central to the system functioning, and one was really pleasing to see because it was his last game for us, but I think it was so instructive to see what a positive impact having a goalkeeper like Fabiański, who is just not even necessarily comfortable on the ball, but just marginally more comfortable than Areola is on the ball, and slightly more accurate in terms of his long distribution. What a difference that makes. Like, you're not turning over possession quite as regularly as we are when Areola gets uncomfortable and just pumps it long because it's gone 5 yards wide of the recipient rather than 2 yards, so therefore we can contest it a little bit better. But also some of it was just bang on the money. It was like just clipping balls into space for West Ham players to run onto, or clipping balls just ahead of West Ham players to run onto and carry forward. So I felt like accuracy and decision making from the goalkeeper were spot on and enabled us to sort of build from the back with a lot more confidence. And I think, again, as I say, it was good to see him have a great performance, but he's also left the club now. So I think, therefore, as I was saying right at the top of the pod when we were talking about sort of signposting to the Patreon, goalkeeper is definitely an area that we're going to have to discuss at some point this summer, because we're going to have to buy one, because Areola and Foderingham are the only keepers at the club, and Foderingham hasn't even made an appearance yet. Obviously, except from a few youth players, but I think realistically there's going to be another first team goalkeeper brought in. Whether that's to replace Areola or just to challenge him, it doesn't matter. But I think regardless, you're still looking for the same skill set. I also thought that, and this is a slight negative, it's funny, you talked about arriving basically at the same point that we were at the start of the season with regards to the midfield and working out what the composition is. I think another thing that we highlighted right at the start of the season, if anything was going to function this season, under Lopetegui, but also it's the same in this system, is that we didn't really feel as though the wing-backs had the reliability of delivery in the final third to actually make Lopetegui's system function, because at the time we were thinking two fullbacks that bomb beyond, Jesus Navas style, need to be providing assists every few games, need to be up and down, constant. And at the time, we didn't think Wan-Bissaka had this in his locker. And we knew that Emerson was more of a sort of middle third facilitator, keeping the ball deep, allowing us to play through, linking up with Paquetá. And we didn't have a left back that could go and do sort of Kostic shifts when we were linked to him back in the day. Wan-Bissaka's obviously come on leaps and bounds and far outperformed anything I think any of us would have expected, certainly in terms of his attacking contributions. But in this game, it felt that we probably would have created or done a lot more with our possession had we had wing-backs that actually were slightly more reliable in terms of their final ball. I don't want to jump on Scarles because I'm very conscious that he is a youth product that is only just coming into the first team now, and it's a huge learning curve. But again, I do think it does highlight, if this is the system that we are to move forward with, that another creative wing-back or someone in that wide area, maybe at Somerville, is crucial, because I think a lot of the time we were getting into the perfect positions, but then it just felt like we were let down with that final ball into the box.
Yeah, Wan-Bissaka, I think the big thing of his summer has to be, how can I add a little bit more quality in the final action when we get there, because he is so good at generating or being part of the group that generates opportunities where he's in the position to cross. So if he can kind of just add a little bit more quality, I think you'll see his assist numbers not balloon. They won't go through the roof, but you'll see them grow.
10 assist season coming. Get him in your FPL.
Don't mention FPL. Skulls. I'm coming from the same position as you, where I don't want to jump on a youth player who's only broken in this season. But one thing I think we've not seen from him all season is like quality in the final third in terms of creation. I feel like when he gets on the ball in the final third, the only option he has to lean on is to deliver a cross, which is fine. I mean, we've had fullbacks who did, Aaron Cresswell, basically made a career out of doing exactly that. But the reason he was able to do that is because his left foot was of such high quality that every time he delivered a ball, it was dangerous. Skulls doesn't have that, or at least we haven't seen it yet. And I guess that really that's the big net. I mean, there's lots of things in his game that we would like to see improve, but I think really that's the one thing we've not even seen a shade of this season. So I agree. I think we definitely need someone in the summer to sort of balance out what Wan-Bissaka is able to do on one of the sides, whether that's at right back or at left back, because we know Wan-Bissaka can do it from both sides. That's fine. But yeah, would have hoped to have seen a bit more from Skulls in this game in terms of attacking output. That doesn't mean he didn't play well in other areas. I thought he got better throughout the game defensively, and his passing game was actually quite good. He found Souček a couple of times in the half space from the back line. But yeah, was it just a bit disappointed in the balls he did deliver into the box?
Agree. I'm glad it wasn't just me. I was very conscious of being overly harsh on what feels like one of our most exciting youth products in in a long time. But yeah, no, I think it is obvious. It's not to say that I don't think there's potentially a place in the squad for him next season. I think there is a question mark around whether it maybe would be more formative for him to go out on a loan where he is a starter week in, week out, than sort of doing this similar shift again where he just comes in and out of the team and looks like he needs 20 or so minutes every game to get up to speed of the Premier League and then grows into the match, as you've said. I think the final thing to touch on before we take a break and go into the second half of the pod, or second, third, I suppose, is that both Bowen and Kudus scored as we wrap up this sort of execution of our in-possession approach. But they both scored from exactly the same position, which near enough anyway, similar sort of move, which I think is just a nice way to round off a lot of what we've seen throughout the season, right? We've got two players who are genuinely, on their day, elite when they come into their preferred position, and the sort of havoc that they can cause in those positions is chaos, but it's always going to be so difficult for them to coexist in the same side, and I don't want to get tied into speculation, but I think it is fair to assume, based on everything that we've seen and read, that Kudus might well be gone this summer, particularly if we need to finance the overhaul. I think he's probably the most valuable asset that can contribute to that. So yeah, I'm glad that if this is his last game, he did score. But yeah, I think also when you look at it and you look at the two players, I think his departure is not necessarily the worst thing in the world for someone like Bowen, because it means that is a nailed-on spot for him. But yeah, a nice way for him to wrap up what was a very exciting and then sort of very underwhelming career at West Ham, if that's the end of it. But yeah, we'll take a pause there, break on to sort of the out-of-possession stuff, which I guess, to let you into a little behind the scenes, was a little bit more disappointing, I think, I would say. Certainly in parts. But maybe we're just being picky. But we'll leave it there, and you can join us in just a second for part two. So, sensibly, from in possession to out of possession, which I said before the break I was disappointed with, I will caveat that by saying that I have only watched the game once. Darcy has watched it several times, and therefore my frustrations during the live watch perhaps would have been less concerning or less annoying had I watched it through with a fine-tooth comb, and that's why it's great to be joined by Darcy, who can tell me how wrong I am. But before we evaluate the out-of-possession approach, I suppose we should actually look at what we were trying to achieve with our out-of-possession approach. It certainly felt familiar, but again, I guess, as was the case with the in-possession approach, a few tweaks that in some places seemed to get the better out of other players. In other places, there were certainly lapses, if not bad performances.
Yeah, and the way we operate from I think it's fair to just call this system a 5-3-2, whatever the sort of iteration of it ends up being. But it means that when we go and press, oftentimes we're pressing. We've only got 5 players to go and press with, right? Plus the wing backs, and then if you do, like in this game, for example, you have one wing back go and one wing back stay. You're going to have to make choices between which men you go to and which men you don't go to, and that's the exact scenario we found ourselves in this game. So we pressed with this 3-2 structure. The 2 were the 2 centre forwards, so Füllkrug and Bowen. But then the 3 were Souček, who was left 8, Ward-Prowse, who was right 8, and then Wan-Bissaka, who was obviously playing right wing back.
Yeah.
And what those 3 would do is, so Ipswich build in with a back 4 and then 2. And those 3 were tasked with sliding across to the ball side. So say the ball was on our left, Souček needs to go to the right back. Wan-Bissaka comes to the closest pivot player, which would have been the right defensive midfielder, which was Sam Morsy, and then Wan-Bissaka would come across to the other pivot player, and then the opposite would happen on the other side. So Wan-Bissaka would go to their left back. Ward-Prowse comes across to, I think it's Jens Kajuste, right? Is that it? Good
pronunciation.
Thank you very much. And then Souček would have to come across from pressing the left back to then pick up Sam Morsy, who was the other player. And it was in those kind of moments, and we've talked about it before, players have to make decisions on the fly about what they're doing. It's not just a simple man-to-man press. When we put ourselves in those positions, sometimes our players can struggle. And that certainly happened in this game, but also there were some iterations where actually it worked really, really well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think it was a tweak that I kind of was pleased to see. Surprised to see, but pleased to see. I think the obvious thing to have done would have just been to sort of go sort of just more basic, really. Like, I feel like Wan-Bissaka coming in to form that three is not a complication. That makes it sound like it was a bad thing to do. I think it did make sense, but like, you also have a third midfielder on the pitch, right? So you just would assume that, okay, we'll just get the three-man midfield to shuffle across, and then the wing-backs are free to lock on as and when we need them to. But it was interesting, but as you say, it does then raise those lapses that I talked about, because you're asking players to sort of be 10 out of 10 switched on throughout the entire game and knowing exactly when to pass over responsibilities, and that's not a judgment that's kind of baked into a system. Is very much dependent on the player being able to read the moment in game and adapt on the fly, which some players more than others are capable of doing. And also it becomes more difficult as you tire and people don't have the legs that they do at the start, and people's decision making starts to happen slightly slower, so you're arriving at the wrong moments. And then I think there's a few sort of moments where fragile, again, is probably not the wrong word, because I think largely we looked fairly comfortable throughout the game, but certainly when we did come under moments of weakness, I would say more often than not it was a case of one chain in the link breaking, and then because the system is so dependent on people getting their individual decisions correct, as soon as one is wrong, you're then in a situation where you're sort of in a dangerous scenario. The obvious one for me is that 2v2 where 2v2 where they break through the midfield and then Todibo comes flying out, tries to nail him in the challenge and just gets absolutely done. Luckily we managed to recover pretty well. But yeah, I think again, like you say, those sort of things come with time, and if it's the sort of thing that we're going to coach over the summer and drill into the new set of players, then I think it definitely does have an element of longevity. I suppose, though, to wrap it back round to what I was saying with regards to, it would have probably just been a lot simpler to just give the three midfielders the assignment and then keep Wan-Bissaka out where he was and save any of those sort of confusing moments. If I put you in the mind of Potter, what would the justification or thought process have been of sort of adding in that complication, if you want to call it
that? To be honest, with the situations that we faced, I actually think that he maybe slightly, not overcomplicated it, but maybe just overthought it a little bit, because if you just go man to man in like essentially you put the two Souček and James Ward-Prowse onto their pivot, and then instead of having just Aaron Wan-Bissaka go up, you have Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Ollie Scarles pressing the fullbacks. You never end up in the position where people are trying to have to transition from one person to another. There's far less decisions to be made, and I think people maybe undervalue or underestimate the kind of the cognitive load, maybe would be a good way to put it. The more decisions you give players to make, the harder the role becomes to sort of carry out. So, and I think that's something that directly correlates with like player quality. So someone, I don't know why I've thought of this guy first, but like Luka Modric, for example, he's someone that you can give a role that requires a lot of decision making and a lot of thinking. Because he's able to deal with the cognitive load. He's sort of quote unquote an intelligent footballer. I don't think that, and I'm not trying to insult any of the players' intelligences here, but I don't think that we have a true like sort of like tactical brain, if you get what I'm saying, on the pitch. Yeah. And therefore reducing the number of decisions that the player has to make is really key within this system. I think it's something that David Moyes does really well, something that like Nuno Espirito Santo does really well. Andoni Iraola does it so well. His players know exactly the decisions that they have to make based on these different triggers. They're not working out things on the fly, and that's why it's successful. Some people call that overcoaching. I just think that's working with the set of players that you've got. Not everyone is blessed to have a midfield that's got Luka Modric and Toni Kroos who can basically play the game in the back of their head, work out what's going on, and then make decisions on the fly. Yeah. That's a really hard skill, and not many players have it. And I think you see too many systems requiring that from players these days as well. I think that's the kind of thing that got like Erik ten Hag sacked. He was asking way too much of his midfield not in terms of just running, but also in terms of the amount of decisions they had to make in their press. It was just too much. That's not what happened today. It happened, or not what happened repeatedly, and it wasn't today either. It was on the weekend. It was yesterday. There were some good moments where we were able to trap them. One of them being the goal that we ended up scoring, and that actually comes from a bit of good decision making, on the fly thinking from Edson Álvarez. So we've just talked about the whole pressing structure. What ends up leading to the goal is Álvarez actually comes away from his assigned man, so he's there to fill the space behind the pressing structure and really think about the number 10. But what he notices is that neither Souček nor James Ward-Prowse is going to be able to get to Sam Morsy to press him, and he also realises that Sam Morsy has not checked his shoulder, and he just flies out to him. So then when Morsy turns, Álvarez is right there, 2 passes, goal. Is that kind of on-the-fly decision-making and I guess like evaluation of risk and reward from your number 6 that makes this kind of pressing system work really well. I don't necessarily believe that Álvarez is going to be able to do that 3 or 4 times a game, like an elite midfielder is, like you get from a Caicedo or a Declan Rice. But that is the kind of thing that you need consistently to make this sort of press work. And I think if you don't have that, it's probably a little bit safer to go man to man or be a bit more conservative in the way you press. Doesn't mean that we didn't generate upside from it in this game, but I think there was also moments to provide some balance where if it wasn't Ipswich we were playing, if we were playing Nottingham Forest, if we were playing Aston Villa, even if we were playing like a Brighton, these teams that transition from the back quite quickly when they get the opportunity, there were some moments that would have been punished. That 2v2 that Todibo was involved in, for example, perfect example of where I think we probably should have ended up conceding a goal but didn't, just because of the quality of the opposition.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, and I think again it just really sort of frames the importance of the summer, right? And Potter's been quick to talk about it in the post-match presser. I think he's already made references to how hard Carl McCauley's working. We've seen links already coming out to the likes of Onyedika, Club Brugge, who, in terms of a profile, seems to be the type that would be able to help us play this system just more effectively, really, be more aggressive and continue to be as aggressive, but with more pace in the legs, which means that you're more able to recover if you do get bypassed, but also the press is able to be more effective because you're actually arriving quicker, and therefore the opposition have less time to think or less time to wriggle out or less time to release the ball. So yeah, midfield is an obvious one, I think. Álvarez is an interesting one because I keep flitting between let him go or actually probably of all the midfielders, certainly out of possession, he is maybe the one that could actually do a job occasionally. I just don't know if he's got the engine to be a reliable starter all throughout the season. And I also think there's shortcomings elsewhere, and if someone comes in with a bid, you take it. But I think we have seen in moments Potter's able to harness the sort of innate aggression within Álvarez's game to really allow the press to function. It's just how many yellows and reds and all sorts of other stuff he picks up. The other area, which I think is potentially more concerning given how much money has been spent there, are the wide centre-backs. I thought Todibo again was disappointing. I think clumsy is a fair word to describe him. Weak, maybe, is another one. It seems harsh, but I think we paid north of £30 million for you. You're a centre-back in the Premier League. That one-on-one challenge on the halfway line, you have to be winning. And it, to me, felt like, I don't want to accuse him of pulling out of the challenge, but it certainly felt like he didn't go into it with full intent. I don't know if he was scared. I don't know if he felt like he wasn't going into it with the right angle or approach, or if he just got it wrong. Regardless, none of those are really excuses because, as you say, against another team, someone that's sort of more dangerous on the carry, like an Elanga, would have absolutely turned that into a goal and the game completely changes. Obviously, it's happened in a match that meant absolutely nothing, but if that's a centre-back that we've got to rely on as our right-sided centre-back for the entirety of next season, it is concerning if he doesn't get up to speed. Kilman, I thought, again, was also clumsy in this one, but I would also cut him more slack because I think if I'm looking at this with my long-term lenses on, he would be the central centre-back anyway, and therefore probably wouldn't be caught in those positions quite so often because it's unlikely that he would have to defend the spaces that he was defending in this game, because I think you'd probably either drop Mavropanos to the bench and bring in a new wide centre-back to fill that Cresswell role that's been played by him recently, or you just kind of sell Mavropanos and then invest even more heavily in the partner to go alongside Kilman and Todibo. But either way, I thought disappointing performances from both centre-backs, and I know that people have said that we've sort of shown a lot of love to Kilman this season and feel like we're sort of protecting him or whatever. I think personally he's been one of the best players for us this season, but I think this game there were a few moments where I was a bit like, ooh, no thanks, that's a bit too clumsy for me and uncharacteristic of him, I would say, but I think it's only right that we flag it when he has a bad performance as well, just so that we can sort of restore the equilibrium in terms of our appraisals of his performances. But yeah, I think ultimately it's going to need a lot of recruitment all round, but as you say, I think if you do, speaking of remedying the equilibrium, I suppose if you do invest in the right positions, I think we have seen enough, albeit against an inferior opposition, that you can reduce that risk-reward sort of gap by bringing in players that actually are enablers of the system rather than trying to do a high-pressing, super aggressive midfield three with Thomas Souček and Ward-Prowse, who, for all their strengths, do not move up and down the pitch quickly enough to really make this work, which is probably why you see him doing the whole sort of Wan-Bissaka tucking inside to enable that, because he actually can cover the ground quickly and recover if he does get beat. So maybe that was a sort of safeguard that he was trying to build in, but as you said, I was trying not to call it an overcomplication because I'd only watched it once, but I now feel vindicated that you've watched it and basically confirmed that it did feel like an overcomplication when we could have just locked man-to-man and avoided a lot of the decision-making issues that came out of it. I think really there's not too much else to say on the out-of-possession approach. I think, again, it felt quite familiar, and a lot of the issues that we flagged are issues that we've seen throughout the season. Maybe in a weird way a good thing to see them happen again on the final day of the season, because it just confirms the amount of work that needs to be done, rather than maybe if we'd done a flawless performance we might have banked on a few players having a good game and keeping them around and going, oh, actually that was just an anomaly. So yeah, certainly some positives. I think you can see the system and how it could work, because we see the moments. Again, an out-of-possession thing leads to a goal. It's not the first time that that's happened under Potter. We've had a few goals this season since he's arrived. I'm thinking Fulham as an obvious one. There's certainly another one I can't remember. It might have been Aston Villa really early on. But certainly moments where our high press has led to goals, which I think for a team that has transitional players who thrive in transition, it's a really nice way to create transitional moments without sitting super deep and then just trying to hit people on the break. You're kind of starting the counter-attack in the opposition half by sort of not allowing them to build and then attacking the little space that is there, because they're trying to play out. So I think it's a positive step. It's a step in the right direction. It's a step in the direction that I wanted to see us take post-Moyes, really. It never really happened with Lopetegui, so I'm pleased that we're seeing it. It's just obviously disappointing that it's taken us this long to reach that point, but more of it. I just hope that with a few more dynamic midfielders, I was going to say Baleba, obviously we would never get Baleba, but someone of that ilk that can just go and just facilitate. Yeah, we need one of those. Ideally 2 or 3. But the funny thing about those players is they're very hard to find. But yeah, unless you have anything else there, Darcy, you want to add on the execution of the out of possession approach. But if not, we will go into the final section of the pod where we're going to try and have a think about the direction of travel as we head into the summer and what we're actually building towards as we head into the 25-26 season, which feels crazy to say. But yeah, we are there. Okay, into the final section then. It's going to be a bit of a thought experiment, this one, Darcy. I think it should be quite exciting because I feel quite excited, and I think that's probably just because I am the resident scout almost that just obsesses over undervalued talent, and the fact that now that we're being linked to players from Denmark, Norway and Belgium maybe just makes me excited for a summer of change. You said you were scared, which I think is probably actually the more common feeling heading into the summer if I've got a good gauge of the fan base, because I think there are reasons to be nervous, not necessarily because Potter hasn't shown us enough. I think there are definite positives from a tactical point of view and things that we have seen, and I also just have faith in him once he's got a few of his own players in to execute at a higher level. I think the major concern is how much change is going to happen this summer and how often teams that go through that amount of change actually come out of the other side of it better off. It's a very difficult thing to get right, isn't it?
Yeah. And I guess part of what's fed into me feeling a little bit nervous as well is one, the awareness of how much it's going to take. If we're going for classic Potter ball, what we're essentially doing is I don't want to say it's another rebuild, but it's another sort of like tactical principle wise revolution. And we just did one of those in the summer. So all that change is making me very nervous. But it's also Potter in the press more recently has been talking about, or at least in the lead up to the Ipswich game, he's been talking about, I'm not going to change or experiment with anything in the final game because we've been building something here. And the fact that we've still set up with the 5-3-2 sort of implies that the 5-3-2 is what we're building. I don't know, and I think this has kind of been my perspective on all the pods for a little while now. I don't think that the 5-3-2 platforms our best players, or even really any of our players, bar maybe like Aaron Wan-Bissaka, very, very well. I think it gives Wan-Bissaka a lot of freedom, and he actually enables it to work. But I think the players that are important, i.e. Bowen and Kudus, have both looked not themselves the whole time they've been a front two together. We obviously don't really have midfielders that are physically dominant all-rounders who can do a little bit of everything as well. We've got quite a specialised set of midfielders. So if this 5-3-2 is what we're sort of doubling down on, or what Potter feels like is what he's building, I am a little bit apprehensive. I'm hoping that you're not as apprehensive, or maybe you see it another way and can alleviate some of the stress.
I completely agree with you in terms of apprehension if it is a 5-3-2 that he's talking about in terms of what he's been building, because I agree that I think we're just so far beyond the point of discussions about whether Bowen is a striker or a right winger. I think it's so obvious that if you play a front three or a 4-2-3-1, whether that's a 4-2-3-1, a 5-2-3, a 4-3-3, whatever way you want to cook it, if you play a three where there's a focal point striker, whether that's someone that's a target man, whether that's someone that runs the channels, whether that's someone that drops in, just someone that by way of their movement creates the space for Bowen to attack, he's so much more effective. I think we saw it work more effectively in the Ipswich game when we had a target man next to him. Target man's a bit of a reductive term, but you know what I mean, someone that can link up and be more of a presence. It allows more of a sort of relational dynamic duo up top, whereas before, as we said, Kudus and Bowen were two wingers that just kept growing further and further and further apart, so there was never actually any link up between them. So it did work better, but I still feel that you need Bowen out wide so that there's more space for him to run into and attack and create those shooting angles that he seems to be able to create for himself. I just don't think you get that. But my hope is that when he's talking about what he's building, I don't think it's necessarily tied to a shape as such. I think it's more tied to principles. I think it's more about, I'm not going to give up on building from the back. I'm not going to throw away my ideas of playing a high press or a man-to-man midfield press. I'm going to still continue to ask my goalkeeper to sort of build up from deep, go long if you need to, but I still would prefer that you distribute to the centre-backs and allow them to build. And I don't think that has to be wedded to any one shape, really. I think you could also see that play out in a 4 at the back system where just one of the wing backs goes and then the other fullback tucks inside to create the 3 that way. So you could have Todibo as a right back potentially and Wan-Bissaka as a left back. Everyone just shuffles across one. Kilman would be right centre back in theory on paper, but then once they've shuffled, he'd be back in that central centre back position. I think you could also do it as a 5-2-3 where you could have one of the wing backs tuck inside to create the 3-man midfield, even though it's technically a 2 on paper, and you maintain the 3 up front. So I think all of those principles can still exist, and I think you can still roll the shapes around whereby the sort of shape that you end up attacking in and the shape that you end up defending in are largely similar. Usually we're going to build up in a 3-2, I would think, maybe a 4-2 sometimes. Usually we're going to attack in a 2-5, I would think, with 2 width holders and then a box with someone in the middle. And I think that can be any shape. And I think we've seen it since he's been here. We've seen a lot of the 5-3-2 recently, but I think that's probably because it's the shape that most strongly allows his principles to be executed with the players that he's got without looking terrible in certain areas. But I think once you've recruited and you can take one of the players out of midfield because you don't have to have 3 midfielders in there anymore because you've got 2 midfielders that can do the work that the current 3 midfielders can do collectively, you can then commit an extra person to the attack and then you can play 3 up top rather than 2 up top with Bowen on the right. So that's kind of where I see it heading. Maybe I'm being optimistic, but I just think based on his track record of how he played at Brighton, he didn't really wed himself to any one shape, but they very much did attack and defend in similar ways in various shapes. Yeah, I don't know if that's just me with my optimistic hat on, or maybe I'm giving Potter too much credit. But I just think I just can't see how he thinks this shape is the optimal shape, irrespective of the work that is to be done in the summer.
I mean, I hope you're right. I definitely hope you're right, because part of the reason it worries me as well is because if we were to be a 5-3-2 team next season, or I guess a 3-4, a 3-1-4-2. Sorry, I guess is what we played in this game.
Yeah,
I don't see where Louis Guilherme fits into that. I don't see where Crescencio Somerville fits back into that. I think you're right about the like Bowen and Füllkrug working better together and kind of seeing the blueprint for that there. But yeah, I actually think you make a very good point about the kind of like I'm not sure what you'd call it, like the passive implementation of principles through a system that is defensively solid and keeps the team in games, and then in the summer there can be a progression to something else through the gaining of personnel. I mean, if that is the plan, then great. If that's not the plan, you need to get on the phone to Graham Potter now and tell him this is what you should have been doing.
Oh gosh, yeah. I really hope. I just think, I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult without knowing who he's planning to move on, who he's planning to keep, what kind of players he's trying to bring in. But
yeah, and our power to bring players in as well, because if we don't have the projected. We know we need some turnover, and if we don't get that turnover necessarily, then I think it is more likely that you see the 5-3-2 because he knows that's what works, and he doesn't want to open himself up defensively or open us up defensively. But yeah, it's big look to the summer, right?
It's going to be tricky, but it's going to be fun. Yeah, and for anyone that has stuck around this far, thank you. But also, as a reward for you sticking around, I'll tell you that this week we will be doing a live show on the Patreon where you can sign up for a 7-day free trial, get a bit of a taster of what's to come over the summer, and we will be doing our very own breakdown of the squad appraisal. Who stays? Who do we try and sell? Who do we loan out? Which of the loanees that are coming back to the club are we going to keep in and around the squad? Freddie Potts, George Earthy, Callum Marshall. We're going to go through player by player, talk about how they performed this season, why we'd keep them, sell them, whatever. And then we'll get a real picture of what the squad looks like heading into this summer, if we were in charge. And obviously, one big outcome of that is finding out where the gaps are, and which players, or profiles rather than players, I guess, which profiles we need to sign to for the system to work, really. And I think I'm keen for us to kind of look at profiles that would enable more than one shape. I don't want us to just think, right, we're going to do a 5-3-2, so now I can see that there's a gap at central midfield, so we need to buy a central midfielder. I want to be thinking more like, okay, where do we go and get the Aaron Wan-Bissaka profile that can do both wing backs, but could also drop in as a third centre back in a back three, sort of facilitators of principles rather than square pegs in square holes, or round holes really, because we'd be shoving people in where they don't necessarily fit. But yeah, it should be a fun one. And really, it will inform a lot of the work that we go on to do this summer. So you can play a part in shaping what our content looks like. Tell us what you want us to do. Tell us who you think we should look at. Tell us what positions you think are important. So yeah, 7-day free trial. If ever there was a time to use it, it's probably now. We've got other bits and bobs coming up as well. We're going to do a proper end of season review next week. Player awards, all that jazz. I think someone said they might put a suit on, but I don't know if that's going to happen or not. We'll see. If that's not a reason to sign up, then I don't know what is, because if you ain't seen me in a suit, you ain't seen nothing. But it's a lovely way to end the season. Clip that one up. But yeah, no, honestly, heartfelt thank you to everyone that has joined us this season, to everyone that has sort of stuck around, to everyone that's commented on the YouTube, to everyone that's liked, engaged, signed up to the Patreon, spoke to us on there, spoke to us on the Discord. Honestly, it means the world. It's not been an easy season by any stretch. It's been an interesting one because we've had a lot to talk about. Most of it negative, unfortunately, but it does make for interesting tactical discussion. And also, as I say, for me, on a personal level, someone who loves getting stuck into the scouting and the video and the data, the prospect of a summer where we're feasibly going to need to sign probably about 8 players is a really exciting one, and certainly a good time for you to sort of get involved at AU, because there'll be plenty of scouting going on. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled, sign up, chat to us, tell your mates, whether they like West Ham or whether they like Belgian Wonder Kids, we'll be providing it for everyone. So yeah, until then, we'll see you soon, and come on your irons.